Hello everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and in this video I will build the Rocketarium Jayhawk. This is a scale model of what was essentially a flying target that was used for testing other missile systems. So let's take a look at the instructions. And on the back of the instruction pamphlet here we've got our parts list. So first of all, there is this fin taper guide. And this may be in your instruction pamphlet. It may be folded in. Mine was. But we'll use this later on to guide the shaping of our fins. Okay, we have a decal set, and there's actually two types here. We've got this set of water slide decals and this set of self-adhesive decals. And then in the small parts bag, we have some little pinstripe decals and detail here that are made of vinyl. We'll come back to the small parts here in a bit. Alright, 18-inch plastic parachute. For the fins, we have these two which make up the main wings. And then another two here, and these make up the tips of the main wings and are set perpendicularly. Okay, we have our body tube. The flare channel is this thing. It's actually a BT5 tube that's been split in half lengthwise. Okay, we have a tail cone assembly here, a 4-inch spacer tube. Now this looks like it's a motor mount, and in fact when you're done building this kit I would hang on to this because it will make a good motor mount. But the actual motor mount of the kit comes in its own packaging here. Alright, then we have our small parts bag that I mentioned earlier. This has the forward canard fins as well as a split in half plastic nose cone that will go with the flare channel. And then we've got the launch lugs and shot cord and some little tiny detail pieces in there. Alright, we've got our nose cone here, and note that it's got 2 holes pre-drilled in it. If yours does not, you may want to contact Rocketarium and see if they can send you the appropriate nose cone, or they can also just tell you where to drill it if you want to do that yourself. Alright, we have an Ejection Baffle Kit, and that comes with its own instructions and parts. This huge block of plasticine clay. This is nose weight, 75 grams. And you may actually want some extra as well. So if you have a little bit of modeling clay, you may want to put some extra weight in this. I've modeled this kit on RockSim, and the way it's built with nothing else added to it, it's only marginally stable. And so you'll definitely want to do some stability testing on this when your kit is done. Because of the marginal stability, differences in paint and glue and things like that might be enough to tip it toward the unstable side. And so you might want to add another 10 to 20 grams of nose weight if that's the case. Alright, and then we have this Balsa Stick there. This is mainly just for doing gluing. It's an extension. Okay, and then you'll have 2 little pieces of balsa here, and they actually don't mention it in the parts list here, but these will go with the main wings to form the ailerons. Okay, and everything else we've already gone over here. So with that, it looks like the kit is complete and we're ready to get started. Our first task is to assemble a motor mount. So you'll need the little motor mount parts bag here. You'll also need the tail cone. And along with that, you're going to need a hobby knife and some white or wood glue here. I prefer wood glue, but white glue will also work. Okay, so I'm just going to open this up, dump parts out, make sure we got everything. Okay, now this is another spacer here. So this one is actually for the motor mount. There's another spacer that I showed you, the white one, and that's actually for positioning the baffle assembly. Okay, so we'll hang on to this guy here. Alright, first step then is we're going to simply designate one end of this tube as aft. Okay, and that's just so we don't get it mixed up. Now, you may notice something here. In most of the mid-power Rocketarium kits, they're meant to fly on D or E engines. They can actually fly on up to F engines if you use composites. And so most of their kits come with a spacer that looks like this. Because of the necessity to keep the center of gravity as far forward as we can, what they're apparently doing here is limiting us to just the 70mm by 24mm engines. So this would be the SD-C11 and D12, and there are a few composite 70mm long motors as well. Okay. Now, if you're really adventurous and you decide that, well, you know, I would like to put a bigger motor in here, technically you can, okay, but you'll have to make some modifications. The dimensions of this will change, so the motor mount tube itself will remain the same. This is actually the same length tube that the E and F size motors use, but you'll need to change the engine clip for one. So this is meant for 70mm motors. You'd have to provide your own mid-power engine clip, and you'd have to adjust the sizes here. Okay. For this model, I'm going to go with what's in the instructions, because for one thing, it's going to keep it more stable, and then another, I don't have to make any modifications. So building according to the instructions, we first need to apply some glue inside the tube at 2 1/4 inches. So the way I like to do this is to use an applicator like this. You can also use that Balsa Stick that came with the kit. Either one will work. I'm just going to open up my glue here. Okay, and I am going to measure, first of all, on my ruler, where 2 1/4 inches are. Okay, so right about there, and I'll put my thumb on my applicator at 2 1/4 inches down. All right, now if you want to know the metric equivalent, it's about 6 centimeters. Okay, so now I'm just going to put some glue on my applicator here, and then I'm going to stick this into the aft end without touching the sides yet until my thumbnail hits, and now I'm going to bring it over and rotate all the way around the inside. Okay, if we look down inside there, there's a nice ring of glue. Okay, and then we're going to take the engine block here, push that in, and now this engine spacer, and remember this is for a D-sized engine, is going to go in, and I'm just going to use the surface here. I'm going to push that all the way in until it's flush, and then immediately take it out. That way, if I've got excess glue too far down in there, we don't glue this to the inside. I can see a little bit of glue there, and if I look inside, yeah, there's a bit of a film, but it shouldn't interfere with anything. Okay, on the other side, you can see where the glue has been pushed up and forming a fillet around there, and that's what we want to see. Okay, next we need to install the engine hook, and so we need to measure from the aft end 2 3/4 inches or 7 centimeters. Alright, now I tend to be metrically inclined, so I'm going to go with the 7 centimeters here. Alright, I'm just going to make a little mark there, and then I'm going to take my hobby knife and cut a slit about 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters, and this should come out right at the top edge of my engine ring, or my thrust ring there. Okay, so I'm just going to put that in, I check the top, and there you can see my hobby knife is right on top of the engine block. Alright, engine block, thrust ring means the same thing. And now I'm going to take my engine clip, and the short right angle part, that's going to go into that slot, just like that. Okay, and so that's ready there. Okay, now for this next section, we need the actual tail cone, okay, and then we have a centering ring here. Now the tail cone itself acts as the aft centering ring, okay, and I'm going to dry fit this to begin with. Okay, so before we put any glue in here, I'm going to look down it, and you can see on this end, the aft end here, there's a notch, and that's for the engine clip. There are also 2 supports that are molded in there, and those should be on the same side as the engine clip. So I'm going to stick this down inside and bring it up here. And this is actually probably the most difficult part of the whole thing, so you do want to be used to doing this. Alright, and what's happening here is those 2 little supports on the inside are keeping the engine hook in place. Alright, so it can still move out of the way to load a motor, but it's not moving around in there, so it won't come loose. Okay, the other centering ring here is wood, and it's beveled. Okay, so this is meant to fit directly into this piece here. So one side says down, and it's actually cut out here for an engine clip, and that's because this is a generic ring that fits in lots of their models. In this model, it doesn't make any difference. If you want, you can line it up with the engine hook. Okay, but that's going to go in like that. Okay, so what they're going to have us do, and this is all going to be done fairly quickly, is apply some glue here just inside the aft end. So I'm going to push this forward again a little bit. I'm going to kind of keep it in that area though. If I can just, what I'm trying to do is just get it to engage there, just like that. So most of this is exposed. Alright, and I'm going to take an applicator once more. And here you want to be kind of careful with the glue. You want enough to fill in those inside ridges, but not so much that it's all oozing up and around everything. Some of that's going to ooze anyway. Okay, so I'm going to put this just inside the aft ridge there and kind of fill in those little valleys. Because that's actually what's going to hold everything in place. Is the glue is not going to stick to the plastic too well, but it will harden inside these valleys, and that's what's going to hold it in place. Now I've got a little bit of glue there on my clip. That's not a big deal. We'll clean it off in a minute. All right, now I'm going to push that in. Now you notice I've still got some glue oozing there, and you want to do this fairly quickly. I'm just going to, you can use your finger. I'm going to use a clean swab here. Okay, and just remove that stuff. You can also use the handle and get around in here. Okay, and then that little bit of residue, I'm just going to use my finger and smooth that around. Okay, so we don't want any blobs of glue on the inside. That's about what it should look like there. And if you've got any here, you can just wipe it off with your finger or with a tissue. Even if it stays on there, it's not going to hurt anything. Okay, but this should still move back and forth freely. Alright, now, still being fairly quick and deliberate about this. I'm also going to make sure, I've got a little bit of a twist there. I'm just going to try and move that around. It's still on the support, so it's not critical. There's just a slight twist to my engine hook in there. Not enough to worry about. And it doesn't feel like it's going to move anyway. Okay, now for this next part, we're going to apply some glue in here and also along here. Alright, so I'm going to put some glue about 6 millimeters or 1/4 inch from the forward end of the motor mount all the way around. Okay, and then I'm going to do like we did with the aft end. I'm going to fill in just this top region here. Alright, and since this is all 3D printed, so it's got this nice set of fine ridges in there. So even though we won't be going over that ridge, it'll have some grab to it yet. Okay, you don't need it really heavy, just heavy enough that there's some excess there on top of the ridges. Okay, and then we'll just put this on. As I said, the notch there isn't going to make much of a difference. I'm just going to slide that on. Okay, and then firmly push that in. All right, make sure it's even all the way around. And then if you want, you can add a fillet to the front of the motor mount there. Okay. And I'm just going to use my finger, smooth that out. Okay, that's ready to go. So now I'm just going to let this dry for at least half an hour before we go on to the rest of this. In the meantime, we will put together the baffle and weigh down the nose cone. So very quickly here, we'll just open this up. And they're pretty basic, and they come with their own instructions. Alright, so we should have a coupler and then 2 baffle plates. And whichever design you get, the idea here is that the holes in the baffle are offset. Either this way, where you have some in the center and some around the circumference, or in some cases it may be half on one side and half on the other. They all work in the same way in that they prevent the direct flow of hot gases from the ejection charge to the parachute, and instead make those gases bounce around and become turbulent in here, giving them time to cool off before reaching the parachute. So we will start by putting this screw eye into the forward baffle plate here, and it has a little hole just for doing this. And here I'm going to use just a little bit of wood glue. White glue will also work here. Wood glue is a little bit stronger and it also dries faster. And so I'm just going to put a little dollop right on that hole. And now I'm going to screw down the screw eye just until I can't see that top thread anymore. I don't want to go past it. I don't want the blank shank here down in the wood. Okay, and then on the back side, it's pushed some of the glue through, and I'm just going to add a little bit more to that, and that'll just give us a really good strong anchor here. Okay, now I'm going to let that dry for a little bit, And while that is drying, I'm going to put a bead of glue here around the inside edge of one end of the coupler, doesn't matter which. Okay, I'm going to smooth that around with my finger. If you get any on the outside, like I got there, just go ahead and wipe that off, because we don't want to increase the circumference of the coupler. Alright, then we're going to take our other baffle plate and just push that into the glue. Alright, and I want to put that in so there's just a little bit of a lip of the coupler above the plate there. Okay. Alright, and now I'm going to let both of those pieces just sit still and dry for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I'll come back to put everything back together. My glue has pretty much completely dried on both sections now, and so now I'm going to put another bead of glue in here. Like that. And I'm going to spread this a bit thinner, but also a bit wider than I did the previous one. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to put this in edgewise and then flip it up like that, and then I'm going to pull it forward a bit and give it just a little bit of a twist. Okay, and then for the most part doing this pulls the glue into the spaces here and forms a little fillet. There's a little blank space here, and I'm just going to take this excess glue on my finger here and just put that right along the edge. Alright, now I'm going to turn it back over to the other side, and I'm just going to put a small fillet of glue in here, because this will have to take the force of the ejection charge on it, so you do want it well reinforced. And again, I'm just going to take a finger here and smear that around. Okay, let's see if we can get a close-up here. Alright, so this will form a fillet in there, and on this side, simply pulling the plate forward help form a fillet around here. Now this just needs to dry for about half an hour, and then it will be ready to go into your model rocket. While the engine mount and the baffle are drying, the next thing we'll do is add weight to the nose cone. And so that's this block of plasticine clay here. Okay, now you want to be careful. This has kind of an oily residue to it, which if it remains on the nose cone when we're done will make it really hard to paint. Now it's also almost impossible not to get this all over your hands, so just plan on doing what you can to minimize contact, but also we'll probably have to wipe this down. So you can either turn this into little pea-sized balls like the instructions show here. I prefer to make worms out of it, but whichever one you do is fine. So I'm just going to pinch off a bit of this at a time. Alright, and I'm just going to roll it like that until it is narrow enough to fit down inside here. Okay, and I'll make one or two more of those and then start packing it in. Okay, so once you've got 2 or 3 of those in to begin with, then take something with a long handle. You can use a pencil, or you can use a dowel. Your hobby knife probably isn't quite long enough. I've got a paintbrush handle here. I'll use it. Okay. Now, you also need to keep it out of these holes here where the canard fins will mount. But this is something else we'll probably just have to come back and clean up later, because most likely the clay is going to extend beyond those holes. And you want to pack this down as far as you can get it. Okay, so once you've got that down, then simply continue pinching off more clay, rolling it out, stuffing it down, and then packing it in. Okay, so now that's all packed in, and you'll note you can see a little bit of the clay in there, a little bit there. And here I'm just going to take a small dowel or the handle of one of my applicators. I'm just going to push that away there. And the same thing over on this side. Okay. And now I'm going to first of all wash my hands, and then when I come back I'll just use a little bit of general purpose cleaner on a paper towel to clean this off, and then a little tiny bit of rubbing alcohol on a cotton applicator to clean out the holes here. Okay, here I just have some tissue moistened with some household cleaner, and I can use that to get rid of that oily residue that got transferred from the clay to my hands and then to the nose cone here. Okay. And if you don't get this perfect, that's fine, because we're about to sand this anyway. And then, as I mentioned, I'm going to use a little bit of rubbing alcohol here. And just do my best to clean out the hole. There we go. And then just wipe that off again. Alright. So, depending on your aesthetic preferences, this nose cone has a seam that goes down 180 degrees each side, and you can either just ignore it and put up with this little bit of a crease there, or you can sand this, and I recommend doing that even if that's all you're going to do, because if nothing else, sanding this nose cone is going to make the paint stick better. And then after sanding, if you still have noticeable lines here, you can fill those with plastic model putty. And so the first thing I'm going to do is hit this with some 150 grit sandpaper. And this will just take down the initial high spots here. Now I'm just going to primarily do this on those seams. Now notice I'm filling up the hole again. We'll clean it up once more later. But here, the idea is to knock down the high spots. Do it on both sides. And then switch to 220 grit and use this all the way around. Now I'm just going to wipe this off with a little bit of rubbing alcohol on a tissue. And the main reason I use alcohol is it just dries faster. You can just do this with a damp cloth with water. You just want to get all the sand dust out of there. Okay, so here we can still see a little bit of a valley in there at the seam. And we can still see a little bit here, but it's actually not too bad. Sometimes if this were a little deeper, I would use some modeling putty on it. And if you're a perfectionist who wants that perfect mirror smooth finish, go for it. I think in this case, this is enough for me. If you a little bit of some valley there yet, I can sand that a little bit more if I want to. And then if you use a filler type of primer, that will help fill in the remnants of those as well. Okay. For now, I'm going to leave this alone, and we'll go on to the next step. Our next task is to mark the body tube. So for that, we'll need to come back here to page 7 of the instructions and just cut this out. And always want to make sure there's nothing important on the back of it there. There's not. Use a hobby knife or scissors here. And as always, if you don't want to cut up your instructions, just make a photocopy of this and cut it out. Alright, then we need our body tube here, and you want a little piece of tape handy. And so here I'm just going to wrap this around and then line up those alignment tick marks there. Okay, and then just put a piece of tape on that, and I like to extend it over just a little bit, and it keeps the marking guide from moving around there. Okay, so we've got a few things to mark. So I'm just going to write on here what they are. So we've got a channel, and that's where the flare channel will go. Okay, the otherwise unmarked ones here are for the fins. Okay, and I'll mark this one as launch lug. Okay, and then we're just going to remove this now, and hang on to this in case you need to remark anything. And then you can either use a door frame as a straight edge, or you can use an actual line marking guide like this one from Estes. Okay, and we're going to just make all of these lines extend the entire length of the tube. Alright, you may notice I've left gaps there where my thumb was. You can fill those in if you want, but actually with the rest of the line there, it shouldn't cause any problem in lining up the various other parts there. Okay, now again I'm going to mark one end of this as aft, just so I don't end up confusing myself later on. Okay, and our next task then is to insert the baffle. Now if you've built any of the other Rocketarium kits, almost all of them are fairly long rockets, and the baffle actually also acts as a tube coupler to make the rocket longer. This is one of the few cases where that is not the case. Okay. Now this means we need to first attach the shock cord here. Now I'm going to show you two ways. This comes with an elastic shock cord, as do all of Rocketarium's models. But I'm going to substitute out a Kevlar line for this. And so I'll show you both ways of doing this. Okay, so if you're going to go with the standard elastic cord here, we'll simply tie this on with 2 half hitches or a double knot. Okay, so it'd be like this. Now I'm not going to fully put this on, but generally what we do here is once we've got that in, is I like to pull it from one direction and then pull the other direction and then pull both directions. And in this case the knot came undone already. That means you didn't have enough end here in the knot. Once you have your knot tight, if you're using the elastic here, then put just a little dab of white or wood glue on your double knot and just kind of work it in, and that will help keep the knot locked in place. And then you'll want to trim back the free end here to about a centimeter or so, no more than that. You don't want it getting caught up alongside here when we mount the baffle into the body tube. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take this off, and then I'm going to bring in some Kevlar here and use a Kevlar shock cord. Here I have 2 spools of Kevlar line. These are braided lines, and as you can tell here, they're actually used by high-performance kite flyers as a replacement for the old-fashioned cotton kite strings. This is a 100-pound test, which means it has a working load of 20 pounds, which means this is fine. Okay, this will easily handle this rocket. The only drawback is because it's so very narrow here, if it hits just wrong coming out of the tube, it can pull back and cause what's called a zipper here, and so it can actually cut through the tube. Kevlar is a bit abrasive that way. Now there are a couple of things you can do to get around that. One is you put a little bumper on here, and sometimes that's just consisting of a piece of masking tape like this, where you can simply fold it over, making a big flap like that, and you position that so that it's right where the shock cord would hit, right here at the edge. Okay, and you can do this for any Kevlar shock cord regardless of the weight. In high power rockets, they'll actually use things like pool noodles and other types of things to do the same type of resilience there. Okay, I'm actually going to use a little bit heavier line. This is 300-pound test, or 350-pound test. It's actually really overkill for this rocket, but it's going to be less likely to zipper because it's a little bit heavier here. So either one would work fine. If you are going to use the lighter line, definitely put a little bumper patch on here for it. Okay, and so the rule of thumb is you want a minimum of 3 times the rocket length when you're using Kevlar, because unlike The rubber here, which is nice and stretchy, Kevlar doesn't stretch at all, and so it needs the extra length for the rocket parts to slow down under the influence of drag. After a quick trip to check out Rocketarium's catalog page, I found that this rocket is 51 centimeters long, so that we're going to want a minimum of 1.5 meters of shock cord. I'm going to extend that out to 2. So here I have measured out 2 meters, mostly off camera. And I'll just cut that there. We'll just set these aside. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, first of all, is I'm just going to tie a water knot loop in this. So I'm just going to make a loop here and tie that around with a single knot, sometimes called a fisherman's knot. And bring that through so we got a nice loop here. And then I'm going to take a little bit of regular viscosity super glue here. I'm going to put that on the knot. And just let that soak in. I'm also going to put a little bit up here to stop this fraying. Okay, I'm just going to let that sit for a few minutes, and I'm going to hit this with a little bit of super glue accelerator so I don't have to wait too long, and then we'll install it onto the baffle. Now that the super glue has dried here, the first thing I'm going to do is just cut off this frayed part, and the super glue will hold the rest of that together. Okay, and then I'm going to take the other end of my shock cord, pass it through the eyelet, and then through the loop I just made here, and then pull all of that all the way through. Okay. And if you make your loop big enough here, it will fit back over the knot. There we go. Okay, so that's going to give us a nice strong attachment point there. Okay. Now we're going to feed the shock cord here up through the body tube. Okay, so we're going to be like that, and if we come back to our instructions here, if you remember, we had that other spacer tube. There we go. Okay, so this is 4 inches long, and the idea here is that we're going to put some glue up inside here. Okay, and then we'll insert the baffle, and then use this 4-inch spacer to push it up. Okay, so we're going to make that flush with the aft end, and then our baffle will be up inside of there. Okay, and then the other end will come out here. Now, Rocketarium might want to do a revision sometime. This would actually be a lot easier and safer to do if we pushed it in from the top. And the reason I say that is we're going to be less likely to get glue on the shock cord if we push it down from this direction. Okay. Now, if you want to figure out the actual spacing for all that, you're welcome to do so. But we do need to have the 4 inches between the aft end and the ejection baffle so that there's enough room for the gases to expand a bit at the ejection charge. And then after this goes in, the tail cone goes on like that, and there's not a whole lot of room in between here, between the top of the tail cone section and the baffle there. Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and do this as instructed. So once more, I'm going to just feed that in. And pull it through. Alright, and now we're going to put this in. Alright, so they say to put a ring of glue 4 inches up. So here I'm going to take my ruler once more. Alright, measure to 4 inches, put my thumbnail there as a guide. Okay, I'm going to get some glue on the end of that. Okay, now you want a good ring of glue, but not so much that it saturates the cardboard. Alright, I'm going to stick this up to where my thumb is there, and I'm going to rotate the tube around. And if I'm careful of my placement, I can help prevent getting glue on the shock cord. Now, a little bit of glue on it's not going to hurt anything. As long as it doesn't glue itself to the side. That's really what we're avoiding here. So now I'm going to slide this in. Alright, and I'm going to keep the other end taut here as I pull that. I'm just going to kind of pull it up. Alright, so now my baffle is just inside, and here I'm going to push this forward. Okay, and straight down until it's flush. Alright, you may have noticed there it was kind of grabbing a little bit, so you want to do this as quickly as possible. Alright, but now we can look inside. There you can just see the baffle plate. Okay, so it's where it needs to be. And up here, looks like we managed to keep most of the glue off of the shock cord. The next step is to attach the tail cone to the body tube, and we're just going to do this dry fitting at first. Okay, so this line here is for the flare channel, which will correspond to this raised area here. So I'm just going to dry fit that in. All right, and this will need to be aligned on that line. And so you can look at it from above, move it back and forth till you get it, and you can actually look down through it. Let's see if I can get a view. There we go. Alright, so if you look down through the flare tube, the line going down the body tube should be centered as well. Okay, if all is well and where it's supposed to be, okay, then what we're going to do is pull this out, and we're going to apply glue all the way around this. Okay, so here I'm just going to run a bead of glue, and I'm not going to put it right at the flare tube there, because we don't want to get glue in that. But what we want is a good layer in all of those grooves. Because again, the holding power here is going to be the actual glue in the grooves. rather than on the surface. Okay. Get some up here on the wood. Alright. Now again, that wood glue is going to want to grab fairly quickly. So we want to get this lined up. Alright, and here I'm going to use a back and forth motion to help move that glue into the grooves. And then finally, make sure I'm straight. Okay, and then we're going to remove all of that excess glue. So I have some tissue or paper towels handy. Okay, and again, I'm going to try and keep it away from the flare tube. So now I'm going to let this set aside to dry, both the baffle and the boat tail here. And I'm also just making sure that everything is pushed together flat. That's all looking good. Okay, so I'm going to let my glue dry for a while and then we will come back to work on the fins.